The desert wind carried nothing but dust and a feeling of dread when Jake Morrison rode into Salvation Creek. He wasn't looking for trouble, but in a town like this, a place balanced on a knife's edge between hope and hell, trouble had a way of finding you. His horse's hooves made a lonely sound on the main street, a rhythm swallowed by the huge, quiet emptiness of the West. The town itself looked like the bones of some long-dead creature, bleached by a sun that showed no mercy. Jake had seen 100 towns just like it, places where dreams came to die. But something about this one felt different, colder. The Silver Dollar Saloon was the only thing that looked alive, spilling yellow light onto the dirt street. He tied his horse, his eyes scanning the other animals hitched to the post. Ranch horses, and a few sleek, fast-looking mounts. The kind of horses that belonged to men who made their living with a gun. He pushed through the bat-wing doors and the smell hit him like a fist. Stale whiskey, sweat, and cheap tobacco. The place was packed. Cowboys, merchants, drifters, all of them orbiting one single point of light in that dingy room. Her name was Lily. She moved through the crowd like she was gliding, an emerald green dress, a shock of color in a world of brown and gray. Men called out to her, their voices thick with drink and want, and she'd smile, a perfect practice smile that never once touched her honey-colored eyes. Jake found a table in the corner, his back to the wall. It was a habit he'd learned the hard way. He watched her, watched how she moved, how she dodged a grabbing hand without causing a fuss, how her laughter was bright but empty. He saw the man behind the bar, her father, a thick-set man with a sergeant's cold glare. He watched her like a hawk, and he saw the other one, a man with a scarred face lounging by the door, his hands never far from the twin Colts tucked in his belt. They weren't just protecting her. They were guarding her, like a prize or a prisoner. When she finally came to his table, he saw the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. "What'll it be, stranger?" she asked, her voice a low melody. "Whiskey," Jake said. "The good stuff." A real smile, small and quick, flashed across her face. "A man of taste. We don't get many of those." She looked at him, really looked at him, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Just passing through," he said. "Plans have a way of changing out here," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Then the mask was back. "I'll get that whiskey." As she walked away, he saw her father's eyes narrow, angry that she'd spent an extra second at his table. He saw the scar-faced man shift his weight. The smart thing to do would be to drink up and ride out, to forget the girl with the haunted eyes. But when she came back with the glass, her fingers brushed against his. It was nothing, an accident. But a jolt went through him, electric and sharp. Her breath hitched. For 1 second, the mask fell away completely, and he saw it all. The fear, the desperation, the silent scream of a woman trapped in a gilded cage. "Enjoy your drink," she murmured, but her eyes said something else entirely. "They said help me." Jake sipped the bourbon. It tasted of smoke and regret. He knew right then, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he wasn't leaving. He didn't know what the game was in Salvation Creek, but he was about to learn the rules. And then he was about to break every single one of them. It took Jake 3 days to peel back the first layer of Salvation Creek's rotten skin. The town didn't run on laws. It ran on secrets and fear. And the Silver Dollar Saloon was its black, beating heart. The saloon keeper, Tom Brennan, ran his establishment with the iron fist of a military commander. He'd been a sergeant in the war, some said, and he'd never stopped fighting. And his daughter, Lily, was his most valuable weapon. He used her beauty to lure men in, to keep them drinking, to keep the money flowing. They called her the Silver Dollar's Darling, a pretty name for a pretty prisoner. The locals whispered stories about her, how she'd grown up in that saloon, learning to count cards before she could read, learning to deflect a drunk's clumsy pass as a young girl. They said Brennan was waiting for the right man to come along and make the right offer. Not for her hand, but for her. Jake didn't have to wait long to see the truth of it. On the 4th night, a man named Big Pete Garrison stormed into the saloon. He was a mountain of a man, with a temper as foul as the cheap whiskey he swilled. He claimed to be a rancher, but everyone knew his cattle wore brands that didn't belong to him. "Lily, darling," he roared, his voice shaking the rafters. Come give Big Pete a drink. The saloon went quiet, a tense, waiting silence. Jake watched Lily's shoulders tighten. She put on her smile. Evening, Mr. Garrison. What can I get you? You can get yourself over here, he growled, and his meaty hand shot out, clamping around her wrist like a manacle. The whole room held its breath. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward the butt of his Colt. You know my father doesn't allow, she started to say, her voice impressively steady. Your father ain't here right now, Garrison sneered, yanking her closer. That was it. Jake was on his feet before he'd even made the decision to move. He kicked the leg of Garrison's chair, not hard, but just enough to send the big man stumbling off balance. Lily pulled her arm free in that split second, her tray of drinks crashing to the floor. Pardon me, Jake said, his voice calm and even. Clumsy of me. Garrison's face turned a deep, blotchy red. You got a death wish, stranger? Jake just looked at him, his body coiled and ready. Just an accident. For a long moment the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Garrison let out a harsh, ugly laugh. You're lucky I'm a forgiving man. He turned his glare back on Lily, his eyes full of a chilling promise. This ain't over, darling. Your daddy and me, we got business to discuss. About your price. He staggered out of the saloon, leaving a poisoned silence behind him. The noise started up again, slowly, but Jake could feel the eyes on him, especially the eyes of Rico Valdez, the scar-faced enforcer. A moment later, Lily was at his side. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Garrison doesn't forget, and neither does my father. A man can't just stand by, Jake said, his jaw tight. Men do it every night in here, she said, a wave of bitterness in her voice. I'm just part of the show. Before he could answer, her father was there, materializing out of the smoke like a ghost. Brennan's eyes were chips of ice. He looked at Jake, and it was a look that promised violence. Stay away from my daughter, he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Jake just nodded once, holding the man's gaze. But as Brennan led Lily away, she looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes were wide, urgent. And as she passed a dark corner, she dropped something, a tiny folded piece of paper. Jake waited, then casually walked over and picked it up, shielding the motion with his body. He didn't open it until he was back in his room at the boarding house. The note was written in a neat, elegant hand. 2 words, the shed, midnight. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. An invitation to step deeper into the darkness that choked Salvation Creek. And Jake knew as he stared at the note that he'd already accepted. The question was, what would he find waiting for him in the shadows? The wind howled that night, a mournful sound that seemed to carry all the secrets of the desert. Jake moved through the back alleys of Salvation Creek like a phantom, his boots making no sound on the hard-packed dirt. The old equipment shed behind the saloon was a crooked silhouette against the star-dusted sky. The door creaked open before he even touched it. Lily pulled him inside, into the darkness that smelled of rust and old leather. A single candle flame danced, throwing long, distorted shadows across her face. She wasn't wearing the emerald dress. In a simple blouse and skirt, she looked younger, more vulnerable. But her eyes were burning with an intensity that startled him. You came, she breathed. You asked. She glanced back toward the saloon, as if she could feel her father's oppressive presence even through the walls. I had to warn you. What you did tonight, Garrison won't let it go. My father's meeting with him right now. They're making a deal. A deal for you, Jake said. It wasn't a question. She hugged her arms around herself, a small, protective gesture. Garrison offered him a partnership, a chance to be a legitimate rancher. All he has to do is give me to him. The words were acid on her tongue. A cold rage, clean and sharp, settled in Jake's gut. He can't sell you. A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. Can't he? He's been selling me in pieces for years. A smile here, a dance there. This is just the final transaction. She stepped closer, and he could see the faint tremor in her hands. You have to leave, Jake. Tonight. They see you as a complication, a problem to be removed. What about you? He asked, his voice rough. I'm not leaving you here. You don't have a choice. You don't understand what you're up against. Then make me understand, he said, his voice low and insistent. Tell me what's really going on in this town. She hesitated, her eyes searching his face, looking for something. Trust maybe, or a reason to hope. It's not just about Garrison, she finally whispered. It's bigger than that. My father, he's trapped too. He owes people, dangerous people. Garrison is just a pawn for a much bigger player. This was it, the first twist of the knife. It wasn't just a cruel father selling his daughter. It was something far more sinister. Who? Jake pressed. I don't know his name. I've only heard whispers. A man who's buying up all the land, all the water rights. They say he's building an empire, and he crushes anyone who gets in his way. My father launders money for him through the saloon. He got in too deep, and now they own him, and they own me. Suddenly the cage wasn't just the saloon, it was the entire town. Brennan wasn't just a jailer. He was a prisoner too, just in a different cell. Run with me, Jake said, the words coming out before he could stop them. We can be gone before sunrise. Hope flared in her eyes, a bright, beautiful thing, but it was extinguished just as fast. And go where? They would hunt us. Their reach is long. There's nowhere we could go where we'd be safe. She took another step, so close now he could feel the warmth of her. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. I know you hide books under the bar and read when you think no one's looking, he said softly. I know you feed the stray dog behind the kitchen every night. I know when you look out at the horizon, you're not just looking at the mountains. You're looking at freedom. He'd been watching her, seeing the person behind the mask. You are not his property, Lily. Tears welled in her eyes, shining in the candlelight, and then she kissed him. It wasn't a soft, gentle kiss. It was desperate and fierce, full of all the fear and anger and trapped hope of a lifetime. It was the kiss of a drowning woman reaching for a lifeline. When they broke apart, she pressed a small, cool object into his palm. It was a silver locket, worn smooth with time. My mother's, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's the only thing that's truly mine. Keep it. So if they get you, you'll know that someone in this rotten town was worth fighting for. Before he could say another word, she was gone, melting back into the shadows. Jake stood alone in the dark shed, the locket clutched in his hand. He slowly opened it. He was expecting a tiny portrait, maybe of her mother, but that's not what he found. Inside there was no picture. There was only a single, tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a note, it was a list of dates and names and figures. It was a ledger in miniature, and at the bottom of the list was a name he recognized, a name from his past, a name he thought he'd buried for good. Cyrus Blackwood, the railroad baron, the man who had destroyed Jake's previous life, the reason he was a drifter and not a Pinkerton agent anymore. The man he'd been hunting for 2 long years. He hadn't found trouble in Salvation Creek. He had been led to it. Lily hadn't just given him a keepsake. She had given him a clue, a weapon. She didn't want a savior to ride in and rescue her. She wanted a partner, and the game had just changed completely. For 2 days, Jake was a ghost. He kept to his room, watching the town through his window, the tiny ledger from the locket burning a hole in his pocket. Everything looked different now. Every interaction in the street, every deal made over a whiskey at the Silver Dollar, was part of a larger, more venomous web. Cyrus Blackwood. Here, the man was a cancer, spreading his influence through fear and dirty money, and Tom Brennan was just one of his tumors. Lily went about her work in the saloon, her mask perfectly in place. But now Jake could see the subtle signals. A quick glance toward the stairs, a slight pause as she passed the back office. She was communicating with him, telling him things without saying a word. She was showing him the saloon's routines, its weaknesses. The plan formed in his mind, piece by painful piece. The tiny ledger was a start, but it wasn't enough. He needed the real books, the ones Brennan would keep locked away, the ones that would tie him directly to Blackwood. He knew where they had to be, in Brennan's office, in the safe behind the painting of a forgotten Civil War battle. Lily had shown him, with a glance that lasted only a second too long. On the third night, the storm he'd been waiting for finally broke. Not a storm of wind and rain, but of men and violence. He was in his usual corner when the saloon doors flew open. It wasn't Garrison this time. It was a man Jake recognized instantly. Cole Mackenzie, a hired gun with eyes as dead as a winter sky. A man who worked exclusively for Cyrus Blackwood. Mackenzie and his riders spread out, their presence sucking the air out of the room. "Brennan." Mackenzie's voice was like gravel grinding on bone. Brennan appeared from the back, his face pale but his voice steady. "What's your business here, Cole?" "The boss is tired of waiting," Mackenzie said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Big Pete Garrison made you a fair offer for the girl. Mr. Blackwood has decided to sweeten the deal. He'll wipe your debt clean, all of it, in exchange for your daughter and your continued silence." The room was deathly quiet. This was it, the final sale. Lily stood frozen by a table, a tray of drinks trembling in her hand. Her face was a mask of chalky white. Brennan looked from Mackenzie to his daughter, and Jake saw the flicker of a war in the man's eyes. Greed versus some last, dying ember of fatherly love. Greed won. "It's a generous offer," Brennan said, his voice hoarse. "So we have a deal?" Mackenzie pressed. Before Brennan could answer, Jake's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up. "The lady's not for sale," he said, his voice ringing out in the silence. Every head in the saloon swiveled toward him. Mackenzie's hand twitched, hovering over the handle of his gun. "This doesn't concern you, Drifter. I'm making it my concern." Rico Valdez, the scarred enforcer, stepped away from the door, his hand resting on his own pistol. "Sit down, Morrison. This is business." "Selling a man's daughter to cover a gambling debt? That's a funny kind of business," Jake shot back, letting the lie hang in the air. "A piece of bait." Brennan's eyes widened in shock. How could this stranger know about his debts? Mackenzie laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You want to be a hero? Heroes have a nasty habit of ending up in unmarked graves." "Better a hero's grave than a coward's life," Jake said, his eyes locked on Brennan. The insult hit its mark. Brennan's face flushed with shame and rage. But before anyone could draw, Lily's voice cut through the tension, clear and sharp. "No." She walked forward, placing herself between Jake and Mackenzie's men. Her eyes were blazing. "I'll go," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "I won't have anyone hurt because of me." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. "Stick to the plan, Lily. Stick to the plan." Mackenzie grinned, victorious. "Smart girl. Get your things. We ride at dawn." Lily turned to her father, her expression unreadable. "The key to my room," she said, her voice flat and cold. Brennan, looking relieved and ashamed all at once, tossed a brass key onto the bar. "Don't take all night." As she walked toward the stairs, she had to pass Jake. Her shoulder brushed his, and for a split second, her lips were near his ear. Her whisper was so faint he almost missed it. "The distraction worked. He's rattled. The safe. Tonight." She was magnificent. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a general, commanding her forces on the battlefield. She was sacrificing her own freedom, walking into the lion's den to give him the opening he needed. He sat back down, his mind racing. Mackenzie and his men started drinking, celebrating their easy victory. Brennan poured them whiskey, his hands shaking. The rest of the saloon tried to pretend that nothing had happened, that they hadn't just witnessed a woman being sold. Jake watched the clock on the wall. Tick, tock. Every second was an eternity. He had until dawn to get into that safe, get the ledgers, and then get Lily out of Salvation Creek. But as he watched the scene, a cold feeling washed over him. It was too easy. Mackenzie was too confident. Brennan was too relieved. And Rico Valdez, the enforcer, was watching him, not with anger, but with a calculating, intelligent gleam in his eyes. There was another player in this game, one they hadn't accounted for, and Jake had a sinking feeling that they had just walked straight into a much more complicated trap. The hours crawled by. The saloon slowly emptied, leaving only Mackenzie's men, drinking hard and laughing loud. Brennan had retreated to his office. probably counting the cost of his soul. Rico Valdez remained by the door, a silent, menacing statue. Jake nursed his whiskey, every nerve alight, waiting for the right moment. It came around 2 in the morning. A fight broke out between two of Mackenzie's riders over a card game. It was the perfect diversion. In the chaos of flying fists and overturned tables, Jake slipped away from his corner and melted into the shadows near the back of the saloon. The hallway leading to Brennan's office was dark. He moved down it, silent as a cat, his hand on his gun. He expected the office door to be locked. It wasn't. That was the first warning bell. He eased the door open. The room was empty, lit by a single lamp turned down low. The painting of the Civil War battle hung crookedly on the wall. He lifted it aside. The safe was there, just as Lily had described, a heavy iron beast. He knelt, pulling a set of tools from his boot. He was no master safecracker, but he'd learned a thing or two in his Pinkerton days. He worked quickly, his ears straining, listening for the faint clicks of the tumblers. The sounds of the fight in the bar covered his own quiet noises. Click, click, thunk. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. He reached inside, his fingers searching for the leather-bound ledgers. He found them, a thick stack of them. He pulled them out, a surge of triumph coursing through him. This was it, the proof that would bring down Blackwood's empire. And that's when the second warning bell rang. Louder this time. The ledgers felt too light, too thin. He opened the top one. The pages were filled with Brennan's neat script. Records of whiskey sales, food costs, weekly profits. It was the saloon's real ledger, all right. But it was just that. There was no mention of Blackwood, no record of laundered money, nothing. It was clean. A cold dread trickled down his spine. It was a plant, a dummy. He'd been set up. Looking for these. The voice came from the doorway. Jake spun around, his Colt coming up, but he was too late. Rico Valdez stood there, and he wasn't alone. Two of Mackenzie's men were with him, their guns already leveled at Jake's chest. In Rico's left hand, he held another set of ledgers, thicker ones, bound in black leather. "You're smarter than you look, Morrison," Rico said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his scarred face. "But you're not as smart as you think. Did you really believe Brennan was the one in charge?" The world tilted on its axis. Jake stared at the enforcer, the pieces clicking into place with sickening speed. Brennan wasn't the one laundering the money. He was just the front man, the pathetic, drunken fool who took all the risk. "It was you," Jake breathed, "all along. You're Blackwood's man." "Blackwood's partner," Rico corrected him, his eyes gleaming with pride and ambition. Brennan was just a tool, a way to control the girl, but he was becoming a liability. Rico gestured with the black ledgers. "This was all a test, to see if you were a real threat. You are. Mr. Blackwood doesn't like threats." The fight in the saloon died down. It had been staged, all of it. The argument, the deal for Lily, Jake's opportunity to be a hero. It was all a carefully constructed play, and he had walked right into the starring role of the fool. "What about Lily?" Jake asked, his voice dangerously low. Rico's smile widened. "Oh, the girl is the real prize. She's not going to Garrison. She's not even going to Blackwood. She's coming with me. A man needs a queen to run his new kingdom." The betrayal was staggering. Rico hadn't been guarding Lily for Brennan. He had been guarding her for himself. He had been playing his own long game, waiting for the perfect moment to take over the entire operation and claim the prize he coveted most. "Mr. Blackwood wants to meet you," Rico said, his tone turning colder. "He has a special appreciation for former Pinkerton agents, especially the ones who failed to bring him to justice the first time around." So they knew everything. Before Jake could react, one of the men behind Rico moved with lightning speed, slamming the butt of his rifle into the side of Jake's head. The world exploded into a starburst of pain. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Rico's triumphant, scarred face. He had tried to save the woman in the cage, only to discover the bars were thicker, and the true keeper was a monster he never saw coming. And now he was trapped in the cage right beside her. Jake woke up to the rhythmic clatter of iron wheels on steel rails and a throbbing pain that felt like a hot spike driven through his skull. He was in a freight car, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and stale oil. His hands were bound tightly behind his back, his ankles shackled to a ring bolt on the floor. Across from him, Rico Valdez sat on a crate, calmly cleaning his pistol. "Welcome back, Morrison," he said without looking up. "Or should I say, Agent Morrison?" Jake tested his bonds. They were solid. He was trapped. "Where are we going?" "To see the man himself. Cyrus Blackwood has a private rail car. He likes to conduct his most important business on the move. Very efficient." Rico looked up, his eyes cold and empty. "He was very interested to hear you'd shown up in Salvation Creek. A loose end he thought was long since tied off." The memories of his last case as a Pinkerton flooded back. The ambush, the partner who died in his arms, the evidence that vanished into thin air. Blackwood had bought everyone, the witnesses, the judge, even men inside the agency. Jake had been left with nothing but a dead partner and a ruined name. "And Lily?" Jake asked, his voice a low growl. "She's safe," Rico said with a dismissive wave. "In the next car, waiting for her new life to begin. Once Blackwood is finished with you, I'll be taking over his operations in the territory. The saloon, the ranches, everything. And Lily will be by my side." "She'll never go with you," Jake spat. Rico laughed. "She won't have a choice, just like her father didn't. People are so easy to control, Morrison. You just have to find what they love, and then you squeeze." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Her father loved his position, his little kingdom of dirt. So I threatened it. And you love her, which is why you're going to die." The train lurched, slowing as it climbed a steep grade through the mountains. This was his only chance. Jake scanned the freight car, his mind racing. Crates, sacks of grain, a discarded length of chain. "You made a mistake, Rico," Jake said, stalling for time, trying to get the man talking. "You think you've won. But Blackwood doesn't have partners. He has tools. And when he's done with you, he'll discard you just like he did Brennan." Rico's eyes narrowed. Jake had hit a nerve. "I'm not some washed-up old drunk like Brennan. I made myself indispensable." "Are you?" Jake pressed. "Or are you just the man holding the ledgers he wants back?" Rage flashed across Rico's face. He stood up, taking a step toward Jake. It was the opening he needed. Jake surged upward, not with his arms but with his legs. He kicked out with both feet, aiming for Rico's knees. The surprise attack worked. Rico cried out in pain and stumbled backward, his gun flying from his hand. Jake scrambled, using the wall to get to his feet despite the shackles. Rico recovered fast, pulling a knife from his boot. He lunged, the blade flashing in the dim light. Jake twisted, letting the knife slash through his shirt, grazing his ribs. He brought his shackled feet up and kicked again, this time connecting with Rico's chest, sending him crashing into a stack of crates. The train whistle shrieked as it entered a tunnel. The car was plunged into absolute darkness. Jake could hear Rico scrambling, cursing in the blackness. He had to get free. He shuffled backward, feeling along the floor with his bound hands. His fingers brushed against something hard and sharp. The discarded length of chain. One of the links had been broken, leaving a jagged edge. He began sawing his ropes against the sharp metal, the fibers groaning in protest. He could hear Rico moving closer, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You can't hide, Morrison!" Rico hissed into the dark. The ropes snapped free just as the train burst back into the daylight. Rico was barely 5 feet away, his knife raised to strike. Jake didn't hesitate. He swung the heavy chain, the shackles on his ankles giving him a clumsy but solid base. The chain wrapped around Rico's knife hand. Jake yanked hard, pulling the enforcer off balance. He swung again, the heavy iron connecting with the side of Rico's head with a sickening crunch. Rico crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Jake didn't waste a second. He found the key to his shackles in Rico's pocket, freeing himself. He grabbed Rico's gun and the black ledgers. The door to the next car was bolted from the outside. He put his shoulder to it, but it wouldn't budge. He could hear the train picking up speed again. Time was running out. He looked at the side of the freight car. A small access ladder led to the roof. There was only one way to get to Lily. He slid the heavy car door open a crack. The wind roared past, a dizzying blur of rock and sky. He took a deep breath, stuffed the ledgers inside his shirt, and pulled himself onto the ladder. The wind tried to rip him from his hold as he climbed onto the roof of the speeding train. The world was a rushing, terrifying landscape. Ahead, he could see the more ornate private car where Blackwood would be. And just before it, the boxcar where they were holding Lily. He began to run, his boots slipping on the metal roof, the roar of the wind and the train deafening. He was a man running on the back of a steel serpent, with nothing but vengeance in his heart in the hope of a rescue ahead. This was no longer just about saving Lily. It was about finishing what started 2 years ago. He was going to get the girl, and he was going to burn Cyrus Blackwood's empire to the ground. The jump between the freight car and the boxcar was a leap of faith over a chasm of certain death. Jake landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact, the ledgers digging into his ribs. The roof of this car had a hatch. It was bolted, but the lock was old and rusted. He used the butt of Rico's pistol, slamming it against the lock again and again, until the metal screamed and finally broke. He dropped down into the car, landing in a crouch. Lily was there. She was tied to a chair in the center of the car, a gag in her mouth. Her eyes widened, first in shock, then in a flood of overwhelming relief. Standing over her was one of Mackenzie's men, a brutish-looking cowboy with a rifle. The guard spun around, surprise on his face. He was fast, bringing the rifle up. But Jake was faster. Rico's Colt bucked in his hand, the single shot echoing like a thunderclap in the confined space. The guard staggered back, a hole appearing in his chest before collapsing in a heap. Jake rushed to Lily, cutting her bonds with Rico's knife. He pulled the gag from her mouth. She gasped for air, her eyes never leaving his face. "Jake, I thought," she started, her voice raw. "I told you I wasn't leaving you," he said, pulling her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her gaze dropping to the bloody gash on his ribs. "You are." "It's nothing." He handed her Rico's knife. "We're not out of this yet." He pulled the black ledgers from his shirt. "Is this it? Is this the proof?" She took one of the books, her fingers tracing the embossed title. Her eyes were hard as steel. "This is everything. My mother. She started these. She was collecting evidence against Blackwood for years. She thought she could trade it for our freedom." Another piece of the puzzle slid into place. "What happened to her?" Jake asked softly. "My father said it was a fever, but I knew. I always knew. He was afraid of her, of what she was doing. I think he told Rico, and Rico told Blackwood." Her voice was laced with a cold fury. "She didn't die of a fever. They killed her. This isn't just about freedom anymore, Jake. This is for her." The train whistle screamed again. Through the slats in the boxcar wall, Jake could see the landscape changing. They were approaching a trestle bridge, a high skeletal structure spanning a deep canyon. "Blackwood will have men in his car," Jake said, "and Mackenzie will be there." "Then we don't go through the car," Lily said, her eyes fixed on the side door. "We go around it." He understood immediately. It was insane. It was suicide. It was their only chance. He slid the side door open. The wind was a physical force trying to tear them from the train. Below, the canyon floor was a dizzying, fatal drop. The private car was just ahead. It was longer than the others, with a narrow running board along the outside edge, just below the windows. "I'll go first," he yelled over the roar. "Stay right behind me." He swung out, his boots finding the narrow ledge. His fingers gripped the edge of the roof, his knuckles white. He began to move, shuffling sideways, one heart-stopping inch at a time. The trestle bridge loomed, the ties flashing by underneath them, a hypnotizing pattern of wood and air. Lily followed, her face pale but her expression determined. She was no longer the saloon girl, the caged bird. She was the daughter of a woman who had died for justice, and she was every bit as brave. They reached the window of the main compartment. Jake peered inside. Cyrus Blackwood sat at a mahogany table, a glass of brandy in his hand. He was older, his hair silver, but his eyes were the same, the dead reptilian eyes of a man who saw people as pawns on a chessboard. Cole Mackenzie stood beside him, a shotgun cradled in his arms. They were laughing. Jake looked at Lily. She nodded once. For my mother. He raised Rico's Colt and smashed the window. The explosion of glass and the roar of the wind sent the inside of the car into chaos. Jake swung inside, landing on his feet, his gun up. Lily was right behind him, the knife held like a dagger. Blackwood stared, his composure shattering for a fraction of a second. Mackenzie reacted instantly, bringing the shotgun around. Jake fired, his bullet hitting Mackenzie in the shoulder, spinning him around. The shotgun blast went wide, tearing a hole in the ceiling. "It's over, Blackwood," Jake snarled, advancing on the man. "Your empire ends today." Blackwood's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. He saw none. A strange calm settled over him. "Agent Morrison, I should have known you were too stubborn to stay buried." He glanced at Lily, a flicker of something that might have been admiration in his cold eyes. "And you must be the girl. You have your mother's fire." "My mother who you had murdered," Lily said, her voice trembling with rage. "A business necessity," Blackwood said calmly. "Just as this is." He moved with a speed that belied his age, lunging not for a weapon, but for the emergency brake cord hanging from the ceiling. He yanked it hard. The train screamed. The brakes locked, throwing them all forward. The massive lurch was catastrophic on the old trestle bridge. Wood splintered. Metal groaned. Jake saw the track ahead of them buckle and twist. The entire bridge was collapsing. The private car tilted violently, breaking free from the rest of the train. It hung for a terrifying moment over the canyon, and then it began to fall. Jake grabbed Lily, pulling her toward the gaping hole where the next car should have been. Mackenzie, clutching his bleeding shoulder, tried to stop them. Lily slashed out with the knife, catching him across the arm. He screamed, stumbling back into the tilting car. They leaped. They landed in the open doorway of the boxcar as their own car plunged into the abyss, taking Blackwood, Mackenzie, and all their secrets with it. The rest of the train, freed from the weight, screeched to a halt at the edge of the collapsed bridge. Silence descended, broken only by the wind whistling through the canyon. Jake and Lily lay on the floor of the boxcar, gasping for breath, clutching the ledgers that had cost so much. They were alive. They were free. But as Jake looked back at the wreckage, he knew it wasn't over. Rico Valdez was still alive, and men like that don't forget. They had won the battle, but the war for their freedom was just beginning. They had to disappear, and they had to do it now. They didn't wait for the railroad crew to arrive. They climbed down from the train and vanished into the rugged wilderness of the mountains. For weeks they traveled, living off the land, using the skills Jake had learned in his years as a drifter and the surprising resilience Lily had kept hidden her whole life. They moved west, always west, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the ghosts of Salvation Creek. The black ledgers were their insurance. In a town in the Nevada territory, Jake sent a single, coded telegram to a trusted contact from his Pinkerton days, along with one page from the ledger. He explained that the rest of the proof would be released if anything ever happened to him or a woman named Lily. It was the only protection they had. Finally, they crossed the Sierras and came down into the green, sun-drenched valleys of California. It felt like another world, a world of life and promise. With the last of the money Jake had saved, they bought a small, neglected plot of land with a rundown farmhouse. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The work was hard. They cleared the land, repaired the house, planted an orchard. The soft, calloused hands of the saloon girl learned to coax life from the soil. The restless, wandering man found a peace he'd never known in the simple rhythm of the seasons. The scars of their past began to fade, replaced by the strength they found in each other. They never spoke of Blackwood or Rico. They never mentioned the Silver Dollar Saloon. They buried that life, planting a new one on top of it. Lily became Elizabeth, a name she chose for herself, and Jake Morrison, the drifter, became a farmer. One afternoon, a year after they arrived, a lone rider appeared on the road. Jake saw him from the fields, his hand instinctively going to the pistol he still kept tucked in his belt. The rider was old and gaunt, his clothes ragged. As he got closer, Jake's blood ran cold. It was Tom Brennan. Lily came out onto the porch, her face unreadable. Brennan stopped his horse at the gate, looking at the life they had built. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. "I'm not here for trouble," he rasped, his voice weak. "I came to... I'm dying." The whiskey finally caught up to me. He looked at Lily, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. "Rico is gone. After Blackwood's train went down, his whole operation fell apart. Rico tried to take over, but without Blackwood's backing, his enemies came for him. They found him in an alley a month ago. A final loose end, tied off by the same violence Rico had lived by." Brennan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch, tossing it on the ground. "This is what's left. The saloon is gone, burned down in the chaos. This is your mother's money, the money she saved to escape with you. I kept it hidden. It's yours. It was always meant to be yours." Lily stared at him, her expression a mixture of old pain and new peace. "I don't want it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I have everything I need right here." Brennan nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "She would have been proud of you, Lily girl. So proud." He turned his horse and rode away, a broken man disappearing back into the dust he came from. That night, Jake and Lily, Elizabeth, burned the pouch without ever opening it. They didn't need that money. Their new life wasn't built on the past. Years passed. The farm prospered. The trees in the orchard grew tall and strong. Laughter filled the small farmhouse. One autumn evening, as the California sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, Elizabeth took Jake's hand and placed it on her belly. He felt a faint, gentle flutter. "There's not much room in this little house," she said, her eyes shining with a light brighter than any saloon lamp. "But I think we can make space for one more." Jake's heart, the heart of a man who had been a drifter, a fighter, a fugitive, felt like it was going to burst. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly, completely home. He had ridden into Salvation Creek looking for a ghost from his past, and instead found his entire future. He had found a woman who was so much more than a darling in a cage. She was a survivor, a fighter, and the architect of her own freedom, and together they had built a life not of salvation, but of true liberation. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption in the Old West, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring the bell so you won't miss the next tale.